What is going on, YouTube? I'm back with part 2 of this Child's Play ranking trilogy. So right now, we're going to go through and rank the Chuckies. Coming in dead last at number 8 is Chucky from the 2019 Child's Play remake. You know, unlike most franchises, I don't think there's really a bad version of Chucky. They're all fairly decent, even the remake. But unfortunately, one has to go last, so... And after having recently blitzed through this franchise, unfortunately remake Chucky does have to go last, simply because it doesn't feel like traditional Chucky. Now I appreciate that they're trying to reinvent the character and concept from the ground up by eliminating all the voodoo and making it more AI based, but I feel like they just missed the mark, starting with his look. I mean, what the f*** is that? When we first saw the trailer and we got that little bit of a glimpse of him in the shadow, I mean, I was hyped. But then as time went on, we saw what the doll actually looked like, and I think our collective reaction was more or less like,
"Oh, Jesus! Oh, God! Oh, Jesus! God! Oh, Mary, Mother of Jesus! Jesus of Nazareth!"
Him being able to control other AIs through his buddy system, which just really sounds stupid even saying that. It's an interesting addition and a pretty creative one, but one that falls a little flat and seems to be a little too convenient because everything's got to be digital, digital, digital. And speaking of the AI, you know, I really don't like the fact that Chucky's evil in this movie is more or less attributed to a disgruntled sweatshop worker who gets pissed off at his job, removes the AI protocols off of the doll before committing suicide. If it were up to me, I'd probably just leave it as faulty AI, like a mechanical error that happened when the doll was being assembled, because I think making it a part of some guy's middle finger to a company right before he offs himself is just weak. And God bless Mark Hamill, because in a perfect world or in another reality, he would have his own little franchise of Chucky films, because I actually thought he was great. And if there was seriously anybody that I would consider taking over for Brad Dourif as Chucky, Mark Hamill was it. There isn't really a bad thing I could say about his performance. So yeah, remake Chucky with a couple little tweaks probably could have been higher on this list, but it sits where it's at right now because it's just not the Chucky that we all know and love.
Okay. Give me one more look at the painting. Oh, God! Oh, God! God! Oh, God!
Coming in at number 7 is Chucky from Seed of Chucky. You know, if it wasn't for the remake Chucky, this Chucky from Seed would probably be sitting dead last on this ranking. And it's really no fault of Brad Dourif's, as I do believe he is funny and arguably the one lone redeeming quality in this shit show of a movie. And it's not the doll itself. While not as impressive as the doll from its predecessor, it's still good from a looks and mechanics standpoint. However, where this Chucky fails is all in the writing. They took Charles Lee Ray, a murderous psychopath, and bogged him down in sitcom levels of humor, and thus stripped him of any sort of fear or danger and just turned him into f***ing clown shoes. But I mean, let's be real, Chucky is only like a 3-foot doll. I mean, if you wanted to, you could punt his ass across the room, but relative to the rest of the franchise, this is probably the weakest Chucky of the bunch, not counting the remake. And I've harped on this aspect enough, but the one thing I like the most about this character in this particular film is that he finally embraces being a killer doll and not trying to become human again. But the fact that they just swept all that under the rug for the next movie pisses me off, so I'm sweeping this Chucky to the bottom tier of this list.
During the edit of this video, it came to the attention of Mr. Dead Jester that it is not the fault of Seed of Chucky that the following films chose to ignore that plot point. However, his opinion that Seed of Chucky is a flaming pile of shit has not changed, and thus will still blame the movie just out of pure spite and anger. Thank you, and we now return you to your shitty ranking video.
Coming in at number 6 is Chucky from Child's Play 3. Let me say that I do really enjoy this movie and I used to love it. It holds a special nostalgic place in my heart. But if I'm being honest, I don't think there's a more bland or beige version of Chucky than what we got in Child's Play 3. Like I said in my retrograde review, I think a lot of this is because by this point in the franchise, the formula was starting to get a little stale. Yes, even after just 2 sequels in, the well was already starting to run dry in my opinion. And I think some of that rubs off onto Chucky in this film, as he feels very paint by numbers, or just going through the motions if you will. And I can make the same argument for Brad's performance as well. The one-liners seem a little flat, and while I can place half the blame on the writing, I also place half the blame on Brad's deliveries as they just seem a little tired at times.
You gotta be fucking kidding me!
Don't get me wrong, Brad has never had a bad performance as Chucky at all, but comparative to his performances from the rest of the franchise, I feel like this one just falls a little flat. But I know you're asking yourself, if it's so flat and boring, why isn't this one sitting at the bottom of the list, or why isn't this sitting below Chucky from Seed? And I'll answer that. First, this still feels like traditional Chucky, unlike the remake. Second, he hasn't been turned into sitcom fodder like he was in Seed. But because of those 2 factors, and like I mentioned before about my nostalgia for this film, it's probably why this Chucky isn't sitting last or second to last. Not like third to last is really heaping high praise on it, but I mean, it could be worse.
Hi, soldier.
Coming in at number 5 is Chucky from Cult of Chucky. Now I know there are like 4 or 5 versions of Chucky in this movie, so for the sake of brevity, I am just going to lump them all in together for this spot in the ranking. Cult of Chucky arguably boasts the most violent interpretation of Chucky. I mean, he's chopping off heads, drilling through heads, ripping out throats, but personally there's just not a real standout between all the multiple versions of Chucky. Which granted, because they're all the same character, they're the same soul of Charles Lee Ray, but there are very little discernible differences. And really that's about it. Like I said in my retrograde for the film, I think the multiple doll thing is an interesting concept. I just don't think it was properly fleshed out enough. Even if the writing doesn't fully deliver in this area, I would be lying if I said it wasn't fun. Between Brad's performance and the excellent chemistry he has with himself, plus some of the most violent savagery in the series, this version of Chucky, or should I say these versions of Chucky, make the cult experience worth it. Coming in at number 4 is Chucky from Bride of Chucky. After a little 7-year hiatus, Chucky was back with a little bit of that 90s swag and attitude. This version of Chucky was something of a rebirth for the character, both figuratively and literally. It was no longer about him being scary, as more emphasis was placed onto the humor. The victims were no longer the main character, it was the Chucky show. And Tiffany. Very much like Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street, shifting gears between funny and scary can be a bit of a fine line to tightrope. So while it may not feel like classic Chucky, like the ones we got from parts 1, 2, and 3, I do feel like Chucky and Bride is a natural progression of the character. Similarly to my issues with Chucky from Seed, I feel like the humor slants way more juvenile and adolescent than what we've typically seen from Chucky in the first 3 films, and it seems like a shallow attempt to make Chucky cool and hip. But like I said before, this Chucky doesn't go completely off the rails. I feel like it's a good balance between classic and new Chucky.
I didn't hear her complaining last night.
And kicking off my top 3 at number 3 is Chucky from Cursive Chucky. After the disastrous Seed of Chucky, this Chucky from Curse marked a return to form. Stripped away was all the adolescent high school crudeness that plagued Chucky and Seed. Back was the nasty, foul-mouthed little f***er we all knew and loved. But what this movie does well is act as a reintroduction to that character, because they don't give you the full Chuck right away. In actuality, it's very close to how Chucky was handled in the original Child's Play, by alluding to and not directly showing Chucky doing the killing at first. But we all know it's him, and when the time is right, bam! Oh yeah, forgot about that. Okay, so his reveal was probably a little underwhelming, at least for me, and these 2 kills probably should have been reversed, but it's nothing terrible. The one nitpick against this Chucky I will point out is the shoehorning in of Nika's family into Charles Lee Ray's backstory. And like mere minutes before the events of the original Child's Play, which turns out to be the catalyst for setting that plot into motion, the dots just don't all connect, and I feel like it adds more confusion than meaningful storylines. Coming in at number 2 is Chucky from the original Child's Play. I love the original Child's Play so much that I almost feel wrong putting this version of Chucky here at number 2, but I got my reasons. This version of Chucky in the original Child's Play might be the most terrifying version of the character. Now, you don't get full-on Chucky experience until about halfway through the film. The first half is all set up. And when Chucky does kill, you don't actually see him doing it. It's all off camera or implied. Which for me is the terrifying aspect, because he just seems like an innocent, harmless looking doll. But at the halfway mark there was a tonal shift, because when Chucky makes his reveal, more of his personality comes through and the funnier the character becomes, in a Freddy Krueger-ish sort of way. And it is that personality that I think really draws you into the character, again, much like I said about Freddy Krueger. I mean, people have been making killer doll movies for years, but what set Chucky apart was his attitude and the fact that he was a foul-mouthed little f***er.
Ugly doll.
Fuck you.
But even though this version of Chucky is so close to being in that #1 spot, I think what holds it back for me is that the doll mechanics aren't nearly as smooth as the sequels. Which I do understand, because this is the very first movie, so they haven't had a chance to perfect it yet. But also, with this being the first movie, I think Brad was still feeling his way through the role, and didn't really perfect it until the subsequent sequels that followed. And if I'm phrasing it wrong, please forgive me, because I don't mean it as a strike against that Chucky, because I do believe it is still a damn good performance. But when you are trying to decide between the first and second spot on rankings, sometimes it does come down to those little finite details. And there's only one Chucky left, so that means coming in at #1 is Chucky from Child's Play 2. Yes, even after 32 years, the Chucky from the second film of the franchise is still the best Chucky to yours truly. Chucky from Child's Play 2 is the most well-rounded in terms of being scary and being funny. The scales feel perfectly balanced in that regard and doesn't feel like it ever tips too far to one side like how Chucky does in some of the later sequels. Everything Brad established in his performance in the role from the original, he comes back and perfects in this film. Just everything about this Chucky is an upgrade over the original, including the doll mechanics. Especially in the face, it doesn't feel as stiff as the original does. It's a lot more animated and able to show a lot more personality, which again blends well with Brad's excellent performance. This Chucky is playfully scary and fun, and it's this version I believe sets the template for the role and the character throughout the rest of the franchise, which is why it sits atop at #1 in this ranking. But that is it. That wraps up this Chucky ranking. Sorry it took me a while to get it out to you guys, but I'm glad I finally got it out. But what are your guys' opinions? What are your guys' Chucky rankings? Please post them below. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. Adios. Now, GTFO!